Greetings and welcome back to the lab. Today we're going to build the keyboard. We're going to expand on what I've already put together, but actually you really want to build the keyboard before you go to the module. I just happened to have the thing set up for the module when I made that video. So this is what we're going to build. We're going to actually extend it. If you can ignore the spacer, then we end up with a keyboard that is that long, that wide, and we'll have all the keys and all the appropriate spacers and all of the bolts. It's going to take a little bit. I'm going to show you everything you need to know to build 2 octaves worth of keyboard. Actually 2 plus, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So let me actually simplify this a little bit. We're going to go down to just one piece, and we're going to talk about what the components are here and what we're going to need. Now there's a header up here for which I've purchased. These are 5x2 with a 2.54 millimeter pitch, and you literally are just going to put it right in the top like that and solder it on. Now I'm putting it down, it's popping out, so I'll deal with that in a minute. The other thing you're going to need, I bought a pack with different assortment of switches by size, and I've decided on, for this particular keyboard and all the design work I've done so far, we're going to need the 4.3 millimeter switches, and we're going to need the 9.5. So the 4.3s are going to go for the white switches. They're going to be turned in this orientation. I'm just turning it on its side so you can see, because in a 6x6, these are all 6x6 tactile switches. On a 6x6 tactile switch, it really is slightly wider than it is tall, if that makes sense. And that is so that ultimately when you go to push the pins through, which I'll just demonstrate real quick. It should just snap in, and now I've got a switch that should work, and I need to solder it on the back side. So I'm going to use the 4.3 millimeters for the white, and I'm going to use the 9.5 millimeter for the black keys. Now, one thing I discovered when I was building the first one, I made a little mistake. I went ahead and I just put 4 of these here, and for the 4.3s and 4 of the 9.5s, and then I realized if you look at the keyboard itself, this right here does not need a switch. And actually, if you put a switch in here, then when you try and put the spacer in, it'll be too tall. You'll have to put additional spacers to raise it up for a blank key, which makes no sense. You actually want this white key, which is actually the reverse of the black key. These are the black keys I had made. And so it is black on one side, it is white on the other side. And so you can flip it over to make that spacer in between the keys where you don't have a black key. So what I need to do first in creating this one is figure out how this is going to lay out. Do I need all of my switches or not? I know I'm not going to need all of them. Now the white is easy. You always have a white key, so there'll be 4 of these 4.3 millimeter tall switches. For the black keys, I'm going to need the first one and the second one, because I've got A, B, C. C. That's the other thing. You can configure it any way you want. You could start with A, or you could start with C. You could start with F if you wanted to. It really is up to you. I decided to go for a somewhat standard layout starting with a C. At least I believe. I'm not a professional musician, that is my understanding. So this would be C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C. There is no B sharp. So this one will be missing. And I'll need this one here. So C, C sharp, and then after that we'd have a D. As we continue on with additional boards. So that tells me that I need to put in 4 of these and then the 1, 2, and the 4th for the 9.5. So let me get those in, and we'll get them soldered in. We'll go for the time lapse here. So cue the music. Alright, well, one of them decided to fight me right here. You saw me kind of struggling with it a little bit, but it's solid. It should work. It just, for whatever reason, didn't want to sit flat on the board, and I kept trying to finagle it a little bit. So next up, I'm going to put the header on here, and that'll pretty much be it for the soldering for this one board. Cue the music. Alright, well, you saw me put a piece of tape on there. That's just to kind of hold it down. If you don't got some other sort of helping hands kind of thing, this is what I do, is I end up putting tape to try and hold things, and then I examine everything to make sure, and it looks to me like everything is soldered in nice and neatly, except for the one switch that we're intentionally leaving off. And now I've got all the switches I need for a full octave, plus a little bit. Now, I mentioned a little bit, and as it turned out, in order to make this board more universal, I ended up deciding it made sense to have these made with 4 white keys and 4 black keys. I understand that a full octave is really 7 white keys and 5 black keys. I could have tried to do 3.5 of the white keys, but that gets a little weird because then you're cutting right in the middle and trying to put a switch across 2 boards. Not a good idea. So it just made more sense to go to 4 and 4, and ultimately for this particular octave, starting with C, D, E, F, G, A, B, there's your next C. So really, technically the octave ended here with this blank key, which also corresponds to the blank space over here. So across an octave, I'm going to end up with 2 extra keys, and the more octaves I put in, the more extra keys I'm going to end up with. So at some point, you end up with, I forget what it is, like 6 or 7 octaves, and you end up with a bonus octave. Something like that. I'll do the math, I'll throw it up here on the screen, but let's just move forward. So now the other question becomes, in building the rest of this, we've got these spacers. Now, why is this hanging off of this board? It's because I knew that I was going to be adding to it. Let me show you the spacers, and we'll talk about that a little bit. These are the full spacers, and they are designed to fit like that, or alternatively, you can shift it over. So if I have this sitting over here, then the next board I put down, move the key out of the way, that next board I put down also gets connected by this spacer, and that helps to stabilize this entire keyboard. It will be that much more rigid. If I were to put all my spacers and just do I'm calling it a half an octave, I'm calling 2 boards an octave, I'm putting quotes around it because it's not really an octave technically, but you get the idea. If I were to put just the full-sized spacers, let's say, and ultimately for these 4.3 millimeter switches, and for the white keys, I want to be 3 levels up with these spacers because they're 1.6 millimeters. So if you do the math, 1.6 by 3 is 4.8. That would be just tall enough that I can take a white key, which we will talk about in a minute, and I can put a white key on here, and then it'll have just enough flex to click the switch. So I want to have the 3 levels with this particular design, but if I do it this way, now I'm going to put another half octave next to it, and there's no real connection. I'd have to keep laying them out and then worry about, while I'm playing, things get pushed off to the side. So it makes sense to have the spacers actually span, and that is why the first one I built is spanned like that, so I can build into the next one. Now this one, I started with the full-size spacers shifted halfway, so the next one is going to end up going on here, and then this will sit on there, and that leaves me with a half of an octave, and that is what the half width spacers are for. So that can go on there. And then ultimately, when it comes to the black keys, I want the black keys to be up above the white keys. Let me sort of tilt that forward, and hopefully you can see that on camera, that they are indeed raised up. So in order to accomplish that, I have a third type of spacer, which is this tiny little one, which is only for those black keys. It'll sit on top, or actually in between. No, sorry, not in between. It only goes on the top level. And there'll be 3 of these high, and if you work it out, then it's 1.6 times 6, which is 9.6 millimeters, and this is a 9.5 millimeter tall switch. So it's just on the top of it. There's just a little bit of a break between them, so they're not actually, the keys will not be sitting and pushing down the switch until somebody actually pushes the key. So that is the thinking with all of these spacers. Now it's time to launch into the time lapse and start building all of this out. I'm also going to continue this on and have all 4 of these. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is let's take this out. I will build this up. I will still have some stuff sticking out, and then later we'll come back and I'll have the whole thing built. Oops, I almost forgot. Speaking of keys, I'm going to end up, when I assemble this, I'm going to end up putting in the keys. So during that process, you'll actually see me putting the black keys on top of these smaller spacers. So that will be part of this assembly, and like I said, there'll be parts sticking out like there was originally. Now, cue the music. Okay, sorry, I forgot to mention the bolts. Let me pull some of those out. So I mean, I did mention them sort of in passing. Oops. That's probably a 9.5. I'm going to leave it out. So I've got a few different bolts here and some nuts to hold everything together. If you look at the original, you'll see actually what I had intended was to have black bolts on top of the black keys and white bolts on top of the white keys. I screwed up when I ordered. I got 15 millimeter bolts for the black keys, and I got 10 millimeter for the white, but I got the colors backwards. So I got the right bolts, I just got them in the wrong colors. And so that's what we have. These are M3 bolts, meaning it's a 3 millimeter bolt. 15 millimeters long, 10 millimeters. That just works out with all the rest of this design. You could change it if you wanted. Like I was saying, I mean, you could change the color of the keys. You don't have to have a black and white keyboard. You could do it backwards. You could have white keys for the short ones and black keys for the long ones. However you want to define that. The spacers don't all have to be the different colors that I chose. I just chose them so it would be easier to identify quickly which was a full, which was a half, and which was a small one. So that's where we are on that. So part of this whole assembly process, I'm going to have to stick these bolts in to try and keep everything together while I'm building. So there we are. That's what that's about. Now back to the music. No wonder I'm having so much trouble. I added one too many spacers. Alright, so just to give you a sort of a live view of what this is looking like, I'm literally trying to put the black bolt through the white key and the other spacers. And if I got everything lined up, this is a real sort of tricky part of it. Just have some patience, you'll get through. Okay, now I got that all the way through. Hopefully you can see it sticking out. There we go. And now I can snap it into the board, and that should help index everything else. Good, my design worked. It's all laying out correctly. All right, back to the music. Did you see my silly little mistake there? I forgot to put the key itself on there, but you can actually hear it clicking now. And yeah, there is a little bit of a problem. I'm not sure what happened with if it's the bolts or if it's the tolerance in the holes that were drilled. Something where the key, the whole idea of having 2 bolts per key was so that they wouldn't move back and forth like this. But I'm not going to worry too much about it. This is version 1 of this, and to be able to have an actual keyboard where I can play a chord, you know, or yeah, well, yeah, I can only play so many chords right now. But yeah, to have it this far along feels good. But the rest of this is going to be very tedious, just trying to put everything together. I'll come back after I've got the 2 together, and then I'll come back again when I've got all 4 together. So we'll save some battery on the camera, and I'll be back in a moment. Okay, so now we've got the first octave, plus a little. Like I said before, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and an extra C with an extra C sharp. So, and I've got the spacer in there like I had the spacer over here. So now the next step is going to be to build another 2 of these boards with the switches and the header, and then fill in all the rest of it. And this whole thing will be roughly this wide. Actually, almost exactly that wide. So let me just get after it, and I'll come back in a moment when it's done. You know, I forgot to do something, and so here I am back. I forgot to actually plug this in and verify that all the switches are working as they should. So that would start actually with this key here, and so I should have red, red, green, green, blue, white, white. Had there been a switch here, it would also be blue, and oddly enough, I'm just realizing that it's the same thing down here. But let's just give it a try. Red, red, green, green, blue, white, white. It's kind of a harsh white. I can do 2 reds and make it brighter. I can do 2 greens and make that brighter. I can do red and green. I can do red and blue. I can do green and blue. So all of this appears to be working properly. This is what this module is for, and that's what the previous video was about, and I still have yet to actually go through and diagnose what went wrong with that one. But this is the one that I built ahead of that, just to prove that it was actually functioning the way it should. So I made some kind of mistake, but that'll be the next video, is me figuring out what went wrong and solving it. But it's a useful module to have just to make sure that everything's working the way it should. That said, let me pull this off. Let me move this out of the way. And ultimately, once I get these 2, once I finish building these, I already put the headers on. Once I get the switches on, I'll be using this to make sure it works properly. So, once again, back in a moment. Okay, 2 more to test. Then we can move on to building the rest of this. So let's start with this one. These are actually carefully in order. If you look at it, I've got 1 and then I got 2 others. Oh, actually, this is the same. Interesting. The patterns are shifting on every 2 boards. I guess that kind of makes sense because it's an octave plus a couple of keys. So it wouldn't be the same layout. Anyway, moving on. Let's try these switches. Red, red, green, blue, blue, white, white. Now I did notice that the blue and the white look very similar, but I do believe this is functioning the way it's supposed to. Let's move this one over. Try and keep them, well, actually I guess I don't need to keep them in order if it's the same. But let's try this. Red. Uh-oh. Red's not powering up. Oh, neither is the other. You know what? I didn't lay the pins in there correctly. And I think I'm going to have to come up with a design change to fix that. Red, red, green, blue, blue, white, white. I think what's happening on this one... No, that doesn't make sense. They can't be wired up differently. They were all made in the same batch. Blue looks like that here, and white has some green and red component in it. But for whatever reason, maybe it's the resistance of the switch itself? That could be a problem. Blue, white. Blue, white. They look the same to me, and this does not really look like blue. I'm not sure what to make of that. Also, when I do this, alright, I'm going to do a little bit more investigating, but ultimately I'm going to go ahead and finish building this. See you in a minute. Okay, I found the problem. I figured I'd show you because it's really simple. There's a solder bridge right here. That's why I'm getting a combination of colors. So I'm just going to clear the bridge. Actually, it might be a couple of bridges. There we go. That one's out. That one's out. Now, if I plug in my tester, I should actually get blue. If I plug it in right, that is. Red, red, green, blue, blue, white, white. Problem solved. On to building. Okay, it's late. I'm tired, but I finished. So we've got basically 2 octaves plus a couple extra keys. If you look at it, we've got C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. Considering we started in C, there you go. I'm a little at a loss. I've been working so hard to try and figure this thing out and been wanting to get it built, and now it's built. It's got 4 headers. Next up, I gotta start figuring out how to make some sounds with this. If you want to follow along, there's information in the description. I've got a website where I've been putting together all of the parts so you can download the circuit boards and have them made and order up the remaining parts. And yeah, now I've got I need to figure out what happened with the test module and get that fixed. And beyond that, there'll be some other videos, but it's going to be probably a couple of weeks before I have some kind of prototype. Actually, maybe what I'll do is I'll do some experimenting. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching.